Good morning, everyone. Here we are. Happy, today is Monday. Today is Monday. In fact, the Mon of days. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining me for the Astro-Babble. This is our Monday, Wednesday, Friday kind of show. Whoop, lost my Zoom on Facebook. This is our Monday, Wednesday, Friday kind of show where I take charts that have been donated by you, the lovely followers, on my social media channels, and we read them live. We talk about astrology stuff. We talk about how to improve life through rectification of astrological chart dynamics, which is really, really fancy ways of saying that I look at a natal chart and tell you about who you are and what you need to focus on in your life. That's my job as a professional astrologer, and we started doing this over COVID, and it just kind of picked up and kept going after that. So let's keep it rolling. We have 5 more charts for you today. As always, if you would like to be a part of the live stream, if you would like to donate your chart to the queue, feel free to private message me your birth date, birthplace, and exact birth time. And I will add you to the list and message you when your chart is featured. And if you would like to schedule a private consult, you can always do so through my website, scorpiorisingastrology.com. Okay, enough about me. Let's talk about these charts. Darling. So first and foremost, I love this name. So Mrs. Frosted Tips from TikTok. Cheers. Good morning. We have you first in the queue. Let's take a peek at your chart. Ooh, you make me nervous. Ooh, you make me nervous. A 29-degree ascendant, 45 clicks in. That's pretty close. That's pretty close, Mista. So one of the things that I'd really encourage you to do is, especially because you have an even number of birth times. So when people have, like, in your case, 1:30 a.m. or 1:25 or 1:15, yeah, a lot of times those birth times are guesstimated, and they're not necessarily as exact as they should be. So when I see a 29-degree ascendant, 45 clicks in, where literally a couple minutes would flip the chart in a totally different direction, if that time is not precise, this reading will be completely null and void because the ascendant would change and shift the entire chart dynamic. So I'm going to read the chart as it is in 1:30 a.m. in San Francisco, and if none of this makes sense, then you might have the wrong birth time. So just as an FYI, that's one of the drawbacks about astrology, and I get people, because we do this live stream, I love to read all of your charts. I really, really do. But if you don't have an exact birth time, astrology is limited by time frame. And so without that exact birth time, we can't do the fun stuff and the accurate stuff that I like to do with these charts. Anyway, so let's go ahead and jump into this chart first and foremost, now that that's out of the way. So we have a pretty powerful first house of self. We have the ascendant in Scorpio. We also have Mars in Scorpio. So the ruler of Scorpio in the first house of self does bring extra power to the ascendant, although we do have the sun at 25 degrees of Aquarius. One thing that we need to understand is when we have a double up of a particular sign, especially when it involves the ascendant, those qualities are going to be more present in the chart than the sun sign. So this is an example of a chart where a client would come and say, well, I'm an Aquarius, but I always read my horoscope for Aquarius and I never feel like an Aquarius. That's because, especially in this chart, we have very, very strong Scorpio energy. We have Mars, the ruler of Scorpio, in the first house of self, as well as the ascendant in Scorpio. That does bring a little bit more of the ninja archetype forward, the assassin who lurks in the shadows. Mars is the planet of the warrior, the initiator, the leader. Somebody who is always first, but who is always looking to spill blood, quick to anger. And then we have that in the fixed water sign of Scorpio. So we have a little bit more of an icy tint to that. Scorpio does like to play in the shadows. Scorpio is the sign of the underworld, a little bit more of that kind of hidden emotional tendency, that hypersensitivity. And because of that, we kind of put those two together and create that archetype of the ninja. Yes, so there's that. And then let's go ahead and move down to Aquarius, because we have a really fun pile up in Aquarius. We do have a stellium here. So we have the moon in Aquarius, Neptune in Aquarius, Uranus in Aquarius, South Node in Aquarius, and the sun in Aquarius. All piled up in the fourth house of family. And this is an interesting dynamic, because whenever we see Scorpio ascendant, the fourth house of family naturally has Aquarius, which is a rather distant sign. It's a rather kind of it's a rather on the fringe type of sign. So pairing Scorpio, who is so hypersensitive and so emotional, with the fourth house of family being an Aquarius, oftentimes we'll find distance in the family dynamic because Scorpio prefers to be hidden and prefers to kind of identify with that archetype of the black sheep of the family. And here we have factors that indicate the opposite. You know, we have the sun and the moon, two very, very personal planets in the fourth house of family. This is major identification with the family unit. It is a little bit of a crazy family unit, like Uranus and Aquarius, the natural secondary ruler of Aquarius, being in the fourth house of family does make that family dynamic rather unpredictable. But it's who this person is, because we have the sun, who indicates a large portion of the ego, and we have the emotional self, the moon, here in this place as well. So family, very, very important to this dynamic in particular. When we look at Pisces, though, the next sign in the wheel, we do have an exalted Venus. So Venus in Pisces in the fifth house of children, sexuality, creativity, parenting. I love to see that. I absolutely love to see that. Venus, goddess of love and abundance, she who is perpetually lovely, she who in Pisces her cup runneth over with compassion. I just absolutely adore it. But then we also have Mercury here. Mercury, Lord of communication, in his detriment, in his least favorite sign in Pisces. So communication isn't going to be straightforward in this chart. Communication or learning difficulties might be present. The way that this person communicates will be very backwards, or it will have a little bit more of an emotional slant to it. One of the things that I see with Mercury in Pisces, you know, Mercury prefers to be straightforward. It prefers to use words. It prefers to intellectually rationalize the speech and the communication that's coming forward. But Mercury in Pisces, the mutable water sign, it's kind of like just drenching all of the words, and the newspaper just starts to run and bleed and disintegrate, right? And so Mercury in Pisces, although it still communicates, it communicates on a psychic level, it communicates on an emotional level, it communicates with subtleties like body language, and in this case especially communicates through art and artistic expression. You know, having this exalted Venus in the fifth of creativity is such a powerful placement. It's so beautiful, and I really, really would encourage artistic development in this chart for that reason. But we also need to understand that from a communication standpoint, art is going to be one of the mediums of communication. Yeah. Let's see. We do have a 0-degree Jupiter in Aries in the sixth house of work, which is interesting because Saturn is also here, counterbalancing. Jupiter and Saturn are polar opposites, so when they occupy the same house, it's kind of like a null and void space, because Jupiter expands, Saturn contracts. They kind of fight for that energetic polarity at the time. But we do have Mars in the first house ruling the sixth. So there's probably going to be some health and wellness in this person's life, in this person's chart. Either that could be working in the health and wellness space, or that could be just the idea of health and wellness or work being very, very important to this person. Jupiter ruling the fifth house of creativity through the sixth house of work, again, kind of brings in that artistic dynamic and or working with children. So we have that. One of the things that will be constantly present about this chart is because we have the North Node in Leo in the 10th and the Sun in Aquarius in the 4th. The ego is in the opposite house of where the ego is ruling and where the North Node is, which is kind of like the personal north of the compass of the chart. So we do have this kind of safety net, this blanket of security that comes forward in the fourth house of family. But then we also have the North Node, which is where this chart is striving to be in the 10th house of success, ruled by that sun, really telling us that, hey, although it is safe to play with your own kind, although it is safe to play with your own kin, to be in that family-oriented space, one of the things that I think this Aquarius energy is trying to do is to shake things up so that you are not fully comfortable in that space, so that you can reach for the stars, or at least shoot for the moon and catch a few stars. You know, that's kind of the essence of that Leo in the 10th. is really trying to make sure that you strive to be not just your best self, but also um, your best self who can be of service to others, your best self who is naturally kind of claiming the spotlight to be seen and to own one's identity that is for the highest good. So that's kind of part of the chart dynamic as well. Money will get a lot easier after 50 in the second round of life because we have Pluto and Sagittarius here in the second house of finance, ruled by that Jupiter in the sixth. First half of the life is just kind of figuring it out. Second half of the life is when we actually get to play with financial stability. Relationships are actually going to be very, very easy for this chart. Not so much friendships, but intimate relationships will be very, very easy for the chart. Having an exalted Venus in the fifth house of sexuality ruling the seventh house of relationships is like, mwah, that is complete Venusian territory. So we have a really strong Mars, a really strong Venus, the two polar opposite kind of yin-yang aspects of self and identity are very well placed, are very well nourished. And I just like this chart. I like it because it's powerful. I like it because it's watery. I like it because it's strong. And although there is going to be some disconnect in the family dynamic, although there will be some issues kind of finding one's place in the world in the fiery houses of work, of finance, of success, I think that there will always be this sense of who they are. And that in and of itself is really, really valuable. So, thank you so much, Mista, for joining us for the live stream and for donating your chart to science. Let's take a peek at our second chart of the morning, who is going to be Carol. Carol, good morning. How are you? Let's take a peek at your chart and see what's going on. Oh, okay. Okay. Okay, gotcha. So here's what we're dealing with, Carol. We have an ascendant in Leo, which naturally is where you get that fiery dynamic. And I know that, again, this is an excellent example of another chart who we have the sun in Virgo, and there is a lot of Virgo energy in the chart. But then there's this dramatic, fiery Leo side that comes forward. And especially because all the Virgo stuff is in the 10th house, like there's this need to be seen. There's this need to be dramatic. There's this need to be over the top and to be witnessed by others, where Virgo, when left to its own devices, will prefer to be backstage, will prefer to be kind of the stagehand, not in the spotlight. And for you, that can be a little bit conflicting because that's not natural Virgo behavior, but you have so many Leo and Sun and 10th house qualities that it's just really interesting to see how strong that fiery impulse is, especially with Jupiter in Leo being in the first house of self. Like, girl, when I say that you're a drama queen, I say it with love, and I say it with the heart of somebody who truly just wants the best for you. But at the same time, girl, you're a drama queen. And I think that that's kind of part of your journey. I think that that's a lovely place for you to be, because if you allowed yourself to shrink back into the shadows, then you wouldn't be of use to other people. And I think that that's a really big kind of part of your life journey is leading by example, right? So let's talk about how you can particularly lead by example. So because we have a Leo ascendant, that means that the sun is going to be the ruler of the chart. Now, this is where we get some really, really fun stuff happening in the chart. And I kept saying Virgo. It's not Virgo, it's Taurus. But we have Sun in Taurus, Mercury in Taurus, Mars in Taurus, MC in Taurus, all up in the 10th house of success and fame. Whenever we have the ruler of the chart in the 10th house, this means that fame is going to be a part of the life regardless. It might be something that, especially because there is a strong square between the ascendant and Mars, this might be something that is fought against. Or is naturally against the personality. However, having Sun in Taurus, Mercury in Taurus especially, I think that this is a perfect opportunity for us to understand why somebody chooses to be put into the spotlight versus why somebody is craving the spotlight, right? In this chart, Taurus is the fixed earth sign. Yeah, it's grounded. It's energetically still. Yeah, it prefers to be the rock in the situation, in the relationship, in the work dynamic, etc. And Mercury in Taurus is definitely a stubborn mental sign. It really indicates somebody who's very fixed in their opinions. But that fixedness in the 10th house is really what allows you to function in that space with a level head. People tend to throw you into the spotlight because they're like, oh, we trust them. Taurus is a very, very trusted sign. It thrives on ritual and routine. In some cases, it is painfully normal, and it just really is able to get the job done at a slow and steady pace with just enough energy to get through that task without waste. And I think that that's beautiful. However, in some ways this is in direct conflict with the personality, and that's something that I'll see in charts is the reason why people trust you, the reason why people throw you into the spotlight is because you do not crave that power, is because you're not trying to achieve, you're not trying to bulldoze other people or play that kind of politic game. You just kind of are. And you are for the reason that you are, and I love that, and I think that that's beautiful. We do also need to respect, though, the darker aspects of the chart. And I think that that vulnerability is also what people are seeing underneath the surface and what they're attracted to. So we have a couple major issues in the chart. The first is we have retrograde Neptune in Scorpio at 25 degrees. The ascendant is squaring that that Neptune, and then the ascendant is also squaring that Mars in Taurus. So at a pretty tight degree, we have a very strong, what would be called a T-square in the chart. And that's a really difficult dynamic between the success that you are meant for, the sense of self in the first house, and then the family dynamic. This is another chart where we have strong family ties, except this time it's a very, very toxic opposition. Neptune in Scorpio retrograde in the 4th often tends to rule addictions in the home. It often tends to be just that really ambiguous Neptune energy that's a little bit too fairy for its own good. And when I say fairy, I literally mean like the fae. I mean things that are not necessarily of this world, things that are constantly kind of playing tricks and making bargains, but not necessarily for the highest good of those involved, especially with Scorpio in this aspect and retrograde planetary movement in this aspect in the 4th house of family as well. So one of the things that I think people are naturally attracted to is not just this Neptune dynamic, but also your moon in Scorpio in the 12th. You know, it really allows you to be compassionate for those people who are struggling, for those people who have undergone trauma, because you also relate to them through that trauma of the Neptune in the 4th. And I think people see that and they're like, oh, they're not going to try something shady because they've already been through something shady, and it's not something that they're looking to do again. They're actually trying to pull themselves out of it. And that what I meant when I said that vulnerability, that's the kind of vulnerability that I mean. It's just really understanding the emotional depths from which you've had to claw yourself out of. Are really going to be the things that make you the most trustworthy to other people. So where it kind of not as a badge of honor, like don't flaunt it, don't make it like super prevalent, but just understand that that's part of who you are, and it's not something to hide. It's actually something to embrace and leverage. We do have a little bit of an issue in the chart with both Venus and Saturn in Aries in the 9th house of travel, foreigners, higher education, spirituality. Venus is in her fall, Saturn is in his detriment. This is not necessarily super great. Saturn is diminished in strength, thankfully, because this is a day chart. But at the same time, having Venus and Saturn as rulers of your 10th house of success, as rulers of your 5th house of children, creativity, sexuality, parenting, your your 6th house of work, health, pets, your 7th house of relationships. Just kidding. Yeah, we definitely would need to do some Saturn and Venus remediation in this chart particularly. You know, Venus, goddess of love and abundance, when she's in Aries, it's this prove it to me kind of love. And Venus is really supposed to be all about unconditional love. She's supposed to give her love freely. Saturn also, who prefers to be steadfast, who prefers to be balanced, who prefers to be strategic, In the warrior sign of Aries, who's all about initiation, tends to be rather impulsive, tends to cut first and ask questions later, tends to be rather aggressive, rather dictator-y, as opposed to the wise lord or lady of time and stillness. And that can be a little bit problematic, especially because this is ruling the ninth house of spirituality, and faith in general. But also we have the North Node here, so you're here to learn these lessons. Like, you're here to understand how to combine this idea of success and faith, how to combine this idea of knowledge, yeah, but knowledge that is both street smart and book smart. You're here to learn how to travel, but also how to realize that home is really wherever you make it, and you can't run from your problems hard enough in order to make things right. It has to come from within, particularly. Although money looks good, we would definitely need to make sure that somebody else is handling the balancing of the books, the finances. You have a lot of entrepreneur energy in the chart. I absolutely love it. Relationships are going to be a little bit difficult. You're often attracted to foreigners or people long distance who are out of your reach. We would need to remediate Saturn to get that a little bit under control. Also, traveling internationally for work, that's something that will be part of the dynamic as well. Okay, cool. If you have any other questions, Carol, we can always work one-on-one, but that is kind of my summary of your chart. Thank you so much for donating your chart. I very, very much appreciate it, and we will continue down the line. Real quick, good morning, Jenna. Great to see you. Good morning, everybody on Instagram. We've got Brother Lightheart, Amethysting Tattoo, actually, who we're about to talk about now, Robin. And then we have Just Healin'. I love that. And Love Reflects on, oh, Miss Kelly Hainsworth, my dear, my darling. Okay, let's take a peek at Robin's chart. Good morning, Robin. Cheers. How are you, my darling? Oh goodness, really? The same aspect? The same freaking aspect? Gotta be kidding me. Huh. Ooh. Okay, my dear. Let's unpack you for 2 seconds. So we actually have a very similar formation in this chart that we had in the last chart, but the dynamics are slightly different. What you'll find similarly in this chart, for those of you who are watching along and can see the charts on Facebook or the YouTube replay, we have the ascendant at 11 degrees of Leo. We have the sun up in Taurus in the 10th house, just like we did in the last chart, at 12 degrees. So the ascendant is applying to a very exact square with that sun. And that's tricky because the sun is both ruling the chart and squaring the ascendant. So it's the conflict of fame within the personality. It's the idea of, I want to be seen, I must be seen, I am comfortable in the spotlight, don't look at me. Don't look at me, I cannot take it. And that dynamic is a little bit push and pull in the chart for sure. Where we find ease in the chart this time around is the ascendant at 11 degrees, separating, but still a pretty strong trine to Venus and Aries in the 9th, which is another similarity. So that style of prove it to me, love, is very much an essence of both charts that we looked at. But in this case, Venus and Aries is trining the ascendant, which I enjoy, and I think that that's a much better placement than the previous chart. MC and Saturn are also conjoined at 0 degrees in Taurus in the 10th, which is much better a place for Saturn to be. I enjoy that. Also, we have Mercury in his rulership and Gemini in the 11th house. Such a social butterfly, Robin. Such a social butterfly. In fact, your friends are very, very valuable. I say valuable, and I make it sound like they're tools, and to a certain degree, relationships are tools. But like the level of intellectual stimulation, the level of high functioning creativity, the level of just massively charismatic friends that you tend to attract is brilliant, and I love it. And I think that it's not just really, really powerful, it's also quite fascinating. That Mercury in Gemini is also ruling your financial house. So one of the ways that you'll actually make more money is through social media and community involvement. When we see the 11th house is ruled by friendships. It's also community, organization, tribes. I'll also put the association of social media with the 11th house. And because that Mercury is well placed, and ruling the second house of finance, I would definitely look into doing more group projects, community efforts, more philanthropic events, more people. The more people you pack into a space, the better it will be for your chart, the more money you will make. Because for some reason, astrologically, when you tap into that Mercury, when you tap into that planet of literal monetary exchange in the house of friendships and social groups, it just flows. So that's lovely. That's excellent. I enjoy that. Also, the more you're in the spotlight, the more you have a chance of catching a spouse, because that Saturn in Taurus in the 10th is ruling the 7th house of relationships, but also the 6th house of work. Again, like you're supposed to be in the spotlight. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But you also, again, you have that level-headedness of Taurus to contend with. So I really enjoy the idea of you accepting fame gracefully once you get over your self-consciousness. Where do we want to go next? So we also have Neptune in Scorpio retrograde in the 4th, which is not great. We also have the Moon in Scorpio in the 4th, which is not necessarily great. The idea of the Moon being in her fall, in her detriment, actually, her least favorite sign of Scorpio. The issue with the Moon in Scorpio is that emotions tend to be hidden a little bit too well. It's also a full moon in Scorpio in this chart. Because Sun is in Taurus, Moon is in Scorpio, they're opposing, the Moon is in her fullness. Having a full moon in a chart really makes the emotions very present, very much active, too emotionally sensitive, too emotionally focused. But Scorpio tends to put things a little bit under wraps and tries to hide them, especially in the 4th house of family, the literal midnight position of the chart. So there are a lot of feelings, but they tend to be kept under wraps. They tend to be hidden, which is unfortunately where they're most prone to fester. So we really need to make sure that we're inducing emotional vomiting on a regular basis is a good way that I like to talk to my clients about this particular lunar placement. Because that Moon in Scorpio, it is so sensitive, it is so intuitive, it is so empathetic, that if you don't constantly check in, like what's mine, what's not mine, how am I feeling, what am I feeling, whose feelings are these mine, what kind of feelings are they good feelings, bad feelings, you tend to just throw them in the back of the drawer, and then before you know it, they get moldy. So we just need to be aware of that, and also potentially sort through layers of family drama, because we also have Mars in Sagittarius retrograde in the 5th house of parenting, ruling the 4th house of family and the 9th house of travel, foreigners, higher education, spirituality. So I think if there was maybe one thing that I would recommend you do, it would be kind of investigating the idea of you being a parent, investigating the idea of what patterns were imprinted on you versus which ones are of your own design. I would also highly encourage you to do a little bit of ancestral healing, a little bit of family work. Setting up an altar with pictures of the family, it doesn't necessarily mean that you forgive them. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are approving what they've done, but it does mean that you are acknowledging their presence, you are acknowledging their influence, you are acknowledging the bloodline, and you are healing that bloodline at the same time through your awareness. Also bringing in the spiritual aspects of, the Divine Mother, the Divine Father on that ancestral altar. That would be really, really important. It would also help to remediate that Venus from a spiritual perspective, having a little bit of that unconditional faith. As opposed to trying to do everything yourself. And that's kind of the curse of Mars and Sagittarius retrograde, is let me do a million things and let me all try to do them by myself without any help or assistance, because I got this. But in the 5th house of creativity, it also tends to be pretty scattered. And it's also a house where you need collaboration. It's literally the house of parenting and children. Like, it's about the mentoring dynamic between people who know more than you, people who know less than you, like gathering inspiration from the people who are closest to you, as opposed to just trying to do it all on your own. Lots of interesting stuff there to unpack. Yeah, let's go back to this Jupiter nonsense. Finance. Finance. So part of the issue in your chart is we have all of this really strong Mercury energy, which is great, but then Jupiter is in Virgo retrograde and is ruling the eighth house of business where the North Node is. And I think, one of the things about this particular energetic signature in the chart is when you start to open yourself up to the abundance that is constantly surrounding you and not necessarily judging yourself or others for financial gain that is or is not happening, Mercury will be involved and will start to flow. The minute that you try to turn it into a business, the minute that you try to turn it into a LLC structured whatnot, then it starts to become super difficult. You're supposed to learn how to do that, but the idea of logically nailing things down and putting processes in place is also slightly toxic to the energetic flow of the situation. So we need to make sure that you're keeping any business ventures light, airy, spontaneous, creative, and then that you're not bogging them down with a bunch of legalese and paperwork. Let's see. Back to relationships. The person that you're really trying to attract this go around is your rock. Yeah, Saturn in Taurus is one of the heaviest placements astrologically that ever could be, and having Saturn in Taurus in the 10th ruling your 7th, you're really looking for somebody who can be a pedestal for you, who can lift you up, but also enjoy the 10th house success that you will be reaping throughout the course of your life. So that's that. Excellent. Yeah, I think the chart has gone cold. So thank you, Robin. I very much appreciate you donating your chart to the live stream. Let's go ahead and we will keep moving. Keep moving. We are going to, who's next? Britt. Britt is next. Good morning, Britt. How are you? Let's take a peek at your chart, shall we? Mm. 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 Oh. Oh, okay. All right. So we've got some interesting dynamics here in the chart, Britt. We've definitely got some strengths. We've definitely got some weaknesses. Let's take a peek at how we leverage this for your safety and sanity. So we have a Cancer ascendant, right? Cancer ascendant naturally means that you identify with the archetype of the mother. It's definitely something that brings a little bit more of the emotional sensitivity, the caregiving tendency forward in you. It's where you get a little bit more of your emotional nature. We also have the ruler of the chart, the moon in Sagittarius in the 6th house. Makes you a little bit of a workaholic. Also makes you a little bit more of a scattered worker. You tend to be working on 50 projects at once. Whether or not they actually get finished is a different story. But we also have a very strong creative writing and teaching slant to the chart, which I think is lovely. Ooh, fabulous. Yes, and this all kind of pulls us around to this 3rd house pileup. We have Sun in Virgo, Mercury in Virgo in the sign of his exaltation, and Jupiter in Virgo being ruled by that Mercury. Jupiter is also ruling the 6th house of work and the 9th house of higher education from the 3rd house of writing, teaching, communication. So I think we have very strong teacher energy in the chart. I think we have very strong intellectual energy in the chart with that exalted Mercury, which I absolutely adore. It's a very Mercury run chart. It's a hyper Virgo chart. We have the Sun in Virgo co-present with the ruler in his proper sign. The Cancer comes forward and is really about taking care of people and really about wanting to make a difference and an impact in people's lives. Mercury could really care less. Mercury is a little bit more about the curiosity of it all, about the learning process. Mercury doesn't really care about how people feel. Mercury cares about what people think. And this is the interesting dynamic with having an ascendant and a moon-ruled chart making you so sensitive, but then also having a very intellectual-based chart with Sun, Mercury, and Jupiter all in Virgo in a very intellectual house, the 3rd house of writing, teaching, communication. So there's a lot to unpack here. I would highly, highly suggest that you involve yourself as a writer, as a teacher, as an educator if you're not already doing that. Higher education is also something you would be excellent at. I think that that's definitely where you are the most blessed, my dear. You are definitely the most blessed in the idea in those particular houses of the writing, teaching, and communication. Now let's move into some of the weaker spots of the chart. We'll start with the seventh house of relationships, which has the North Node here. You're here to learn about relationships, but we also have it ruled by Saturn and Aquarius retrograde in the eighth. So we might have, at its worst, this placement will sometimes indicate the death of relationships at an early age, or relationships that ended a little bit too soon, a little bit too spontaneously. But you're also looking for somebody who, because of this placement, you're naturally attracted to somebody who's a little bit more of an entrepreneur, a little bit more of a legal edge, somebody who constantly plans for the future, who's playing the long game, somebody who has a plan, puts your personal relationship house at ease, because then you can start to develop thoughts about having a life with this person, as opposed to somebody who's just kind of wandering or meandering through their own life experience. So that's nice. We do have Neptune and Uranus retrograde in the seventh house, which I'm not a super big fan of. It does indicate some unpredictability. It does indicate some escapist tendencies in the relationship dynamic. But overall, relationships are something you're here to learn. They're not really supposed to be easy for you in general. So I think the more books you can pick up on relationships, the more you can learn about those dynamics, the more you can understand boundaries, both for yourself and for your partner. Like, that would be an excellent area for you to put that Virgo energy to work and start to learn and grow and develop your seventh house of relationships and understand what it means to be in a healthy relationship. Because let's be honest, you weren't really given the best imprinting in that department. Having Mars in Libra, the sign of his fall, not necessarily ideal in the fourth house of family and home. Mars in Libra, Mars is the planet of initiation, and Libra is the planet, the sign of options. Yeah. So when we have single-pointed Mars going into balanced Libra, it scatters and misdirects the energy of Mars. So we have an unfocused family dynamic, would be the best way to kind of say it. And I think that there's also kind of financial issues that rose up from the family dynamic as well. Potentially due to overspending, Venus and Leo in the second house. That's a little bit of a curious financial placement, especially when it's ruling that fourth house Mars. I think that when we start to unpack the chart a little bit heavier, we start to understand, like, you're here to learn about relationships because the relationships that you grew up with were not necessarily well formed. They were not necessarily healthy. So the more you dive into that seventh house dynamic and really put your intellectual understanding of those Virgo placements to work, then you'll start to heal not just your relationships, but also your understanding of what relationships are for, what they mean, kind of et cetera, et cetera. We do have Pluto in Scorpio here in the fifth house, which normally indicates adopting children later in life or having children later in life in general. So if you have considered that, or if you're wondering about child dynamics, Pluto is the level 50 planet. It tends to mature after we're halfway through the life, and for you to put that in the fifth house of creativity, sexuality, children, and parenting, it really does just bring forward those topics having importance in the second half of your life, not necessarily in the first half. They'll be pretty messy in the first half because you're still recovering. Mars is ruling that Pluto in Scorpio, so it's really about you understanding how to repair your life for the first half, and then second half is actually implementing and working with the machine that you've corrected in the second half of life. So learn, grow, absorb, adapt, adopt, really create as much space as you can for your own learning process in the first half of life. And then in the second half of life, then you can start to actually play with some of the principles that you've forged throughout that first half. That's it? That's all we're talking about? Okay, Britt, that's it. Chart's kind of gone cold from that dynamic. I think that was a lot to digest. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out. We can always schedule a private consult and go one-on-one with it. But let's go ahead and move on to our final chart of the morning. And we're here to talk about Michelle. Michelle, my darling, how are you? Let's take a peek at Michelle's chart, shall we? Hmm. Hmm. Mm-mm-mm. Okay. Okay. Let's get to it. So, Scorpio ascendant, right off the bat for Michelle. Scorpio ascendant makes somebody naturally a little bit more sensitive, a little bit more protective. It definitely attaches them to the underworld aspect of life, little bit of darkness, a little bit of shadow. It's a great aesthetic, a little bit goth. But what I find even more fascinating is the ruler of the chart, Mars, is in the sign of Sagittarius in the second house of finances. Money is going to be very, very important for this chart. Part of the reason is because the ruler of the chart is here. Second, we also have the most prosperous planet of the chart here, Jupiter in Sagittarius. The planet of luck in his own sign in the second house of finance. Like, you don't get more abundant than that. You don't get financially better than that. But we also have Neptune and Sag here, and I am worried about that Mars and Sag, because Neptune tends to make things confusing. Mars tends to make things quick. And Sagittarius as a sign tends to be a little bit prone to overspending. So although earning potential is really high, so is spending potential, and spending potential often due to confusion or impulse. Yeah. So we maybe need to put some financial rules in place. We might need to put some limits in place. We might need to watch the wallet just a little bit and create a safer space for finances to kind of thrive and build up and not necessarily go in and out so quickly. But then we also need to understand, like, because you've attached who you are to the second house of finance, your status of wealth will be highly, highly connected to your sense of self, your self-esteem, your idea of whether or not you're doing what you should be doing in life is often revolving around the money that you earn and the money that you have. So with that being said, I think it's important, like, if bank account goes low and you start to become low mentally and emotionally, that's kind of why that is. Likewise, if bank account goes high and you think that you're on top of the world and all of your boundaries start to slip, as is prone with Sagittarius, we have that tendency for overspending because you're just being indiscriminate with your energies at that point because you just have so much of it. And that's kind of the ebb and the flow of Jupiter. Now we have to get into some tricky stuff. Because we have the moon in Libra in the 12th house of hidden enemies, co-present with Uranus in Libra retrograde, which is not necessarily ideal. It means that the emotions are kind of tricky in this chart. They're tricky to deal with. You constantly wanting to be the peacekeeper, you constantly wanting to be the go-between, you constantly wanting to be the person who makes things better for other people and helps to remediate other people's problems, often tends to drag you into the mud. And that's not a super healthy place for the moon to be. So we just need to be aware of your emotional state, and although you can help, it doesn't mean that you should help. Nor should you attach your emotional state to other people who are in trauma. Yeah? Attaching your own personal emotional state and your heartstrings to somebody who is undergoing emotional crisis, not necessarily healthy, right? So you can do good, you can, especially with a Libra moon, you can do a lot of good, but that good needs to be tempered, it needs to be monitored, you need to have better boundaries in that department. Seems to be a common theme. Speaking of boundaries, your relationships will teach you boundaries. They will teach you a lot of boundaries because you have Venus and Capricorn in the third house of writing, teaching, communication, in mutual reception with, again, we see Saturn in Taurus. Saturn in Taurus in the seventh house of relationships in mutual reception with Venus. She's 5 degrees away, but it's still forming a very loose trine. like that's brilliant, and you're naturally going to be attracted to people who will help you maintain those boundaries. Now you might find it that your relationships over time start to become a little bit more stubborn, a little bit more sour, a little bit more curmudgeon. Saturn in Taurus is known for its predictability, but it's also known for its excessive stubbornness, and it's just inability to be anything but predictable, rational, and normal to its own detriment. So if you're looking for a little bit of spice, not necessarily the ideal relationship there, but I think your chart dynamic would do really well from somebody who's just super grounded. Like when you go date people, one of the things that I'll see a lot with this particular formation is people who are attracted to somebody who has a ritual for their day, somebody who's worked the same 9 to 5 for the past, 10, 20, 30 years, somebody who has the same thing for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, somebody who is just so normal and so predictable. It really does help ground this chart, because some of those practices and processes will then transfer or rub off on you, which is something that you need. Then we have Mercury in Aquarius, North Node in Aquarius, and Sun in Aquarius, all in the fourth house of family. There is an identification with the family. Whether or not that's an issue is to be seen. It may actually come forward that you are introduced to your spouse via your family. That's always a fun thing, because your family kind of knows your type best and knows who would be best for you. But the North Node in the fourth house of family really does come forward and remind us that this is a responsibility for the chart, is to understand what it means to have a family, to understand what it means to be part of a family unit, to understand what it means to have a healthy communication train within the family, with Mercury being here. The Sun in Aquarius, although there is a sense of distance that Sun and Aquarius can produce in the fourth house of family, I think it's still important to understand that if you don't have that tribe, if you don't have that family unit, there's going to be a sense of a piece of you that is just lost, that feels misplaced, or that can't feel like it can't come home to roost, is a good way to think about it. So the way that we rectify that is by working on the family unit, working on the family dynamic. Let's see, where do we want to go next? Work stuff, you'll earn good money from what you do. Like money, again, the earning of money is not necessarily an issue. It has been an issue for the past year and a half because Jupiter, the lord of your second house of finance, has been in Capricorn, but that's getting easier because he's no longer retrograde and blah, blah, blah. So there's a lot of good change coming down the pipeline, and it'll be even better. It'll be even better when everything moves out of Capricorn and into Aquarius on December 19th for your finances. So if you can just hold out for a couple more months, we've got it in the bag. But kind of recognizing the slump is where you're at right now. And that's it. Chart has gone cold. Thank you, Michelle, for donating your chart. I very, very much appreciate it. Always a pleasure to read people's charts through the live stream. But that is it for this morning. Everybody jumping on. I very, very much appreciate you joining the live stream. Celeste wanted to know, how do we get charted? If you would like to be a part of the live stream, you can always private message me your birth date, place, and exact birth time, and I will add you to the list. The list is rather long, so please be patient. For those of you who have already sent in your information, I private message people when their chart is featured the morning of. All of the sessions are recorded, so even if you can't attend live, you can always take a peek later at the recording. If you would like to work with me privately, one-on-one, if you would like to learn astrology, you can always go ahead and check out my website, which is ScorpioRisingAstrology.com, which is Bsipin Podcast. I see you, love you. So feel free to connect with me on social media. Drop your birth date, place, time if you'd like to be a part of the chart. But we'll be back here on Wednesday doing what we do, finger gunning it out with some more astrology charts. But in the meantime, I will let you get on with your morning, Brother Lightheart. So great to see you. From now on, we'll call it a wraps. May the stars be ever in your favor.